My mother-in-law called me a gold digger and told my husband I was after his money. I quietly transferred $12,000 to pay off her credit card debt. When she found out, she cried and said, "Why would you do that?" When I met Noah, I wasn't in a great place. I was recently divorced, 34, and just starting to put the pieces of my life back together. I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment near Capitol Hill in Seattle, worked as a counselor at a local nonprofit for teens, and spent my evenings reading or walking around Green Lake just to clear my head. Noah was soft-spoken but deeply present. We met at an art event downtown. I was there for a friend's exhibit, and he was there for the wine, he claimed, though he ended up staying long after his glass was empty. We talked for 3 hours under those two bright gallery lights. I told him I was a therapist for kids, and he looked at me like I'd just said I ran into burning buildings for fun. "That's got to be exhausting," he said. I remember smiling, because no one had ever said that to me so plainly. Most people just nodded politely. He worked in software. Quiet guy, good job, stable. We moved in together after a year. It was an easy decision. The two-bedroom apartment we chose wasn't flashy, but it had tall windows and the smell of pine trees drifting in from the courtyard. Life was peaceful. Then I met Vera, his mother. She had the kind of presence that entered a room 2 minutes before she did. Sharp red lipstick, expensive perfume, clothes that screamed old money but maybe whispered credit debt if you looked closer. She was polite, yes. Cordial, even. But it's cold. Not a single warm bone in her body, at least not toward me. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down and said, "You're different than I pictured." That was all. I wasn't sure what that meant. I still don't. Vera always had a way of speaking in riddles, condescending little comments wrapped in smiles. I brushed it off. I'd learned from my job to give people grace, to see the hurt underneath. But it became clear very quickly that she didn't like me. Maybe it was my past. Maybe it was my job. Maybe it was the fact that I didn't dress like the women Noah had dated before. I didn't care about brands, and I certainly wasn't the type to pretend. I was real, and maybe that's what scared her. Things escalated slowly. When we got married, just a simple courthouse wedding with 2 of our closest friends, Vera didn't even pretend to be happy. She called Noah the next day and told him she was concerned. She said he was being impulsive, that he didn't know the real me. She used the words baggage and convenient timing. I didn't say anything. I knew her type. The more noise you make, the more they dig in. So I stayed quiet. But the whispers never stopped. She'd say things like, "Must be nice not to have to work long hours when you're married to a man like Noah." Or she'd ask me how much I made in a job like that, pretending it was small talk. Once, during brunch, she leaned over and said, "You know, you really should sign a postnup, just so everything's clear." Noah always defended me, but I could tell it wore him down. I hated putting him in the middle. He had this deep loyalty to her, even if she didn't always deserve it. She raised him alone after his dad left when he was 10. I understood why he felt indebted. But it made things harder. Then came the letter. Yes, an actual handwritten letter, folded neatly and slipped into a blue envelope, addressed to my husband. I found it while clearing out the dining table one evening. I didn't open it. I left it on his desk and tried to ignore the tight feeling in my chest. Later that night, he read it in silence, jaw clenched. When I asked what it said, he handed it to me without a word. It was 2 pages of pure venom. She accused me of being manipulative, suggested I was marrying him for financial security, and even mentioned my student loans, how she found it alarming that I hadn't paid them off yet at my age. She ended it by saying she was worried that I didn't value the things Noah had worked hard for. I felt like I'd been punched. It wasn't even about money, it was about the narrative she had constructed in her mind. That I was a gold digger. That I was less than. I didn't cry. I cleaned the kitchen. I vacuumed the living room. I folded laundry until my hands hurt. And then, when Noah had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at nothing. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired of constantly trying to win over someone who had already decided who I was. And that's when I did something I didn't plan. It started innocently enough. I was venting to a friend who worked at a local credit union about how some people judge others without knowing their own situation. I mentioned Vera in passing, and he blinked. Then he said something like, "You mean Vera Halden? She's one of our clients." Honestly, I'm surprised she's still managing her cards the way she is. That's how I found out. Vera had $12,000 plus in credit card debt. Maxed out cards. Interest rates through the roof. My friend didn't give me details, just enough to piece things together. The clothes, the bags, the image, she was barely holding it together. And I'm ashamed to admit this, but my first reaction was satisfaction. It was this sick feeling of vindication. This woman, who'd judged me for not having a mortgage, was living off revolving credit and pretending she was above me. But it didn't last. That feeling was replaced by something else. Pity. I couldn't imagine carrying that much shame around, pretending everything was fine while the numbers bled out behind the scenes. So I paid for it. Quietly. Anonymously. I logged into the account Noah and I had built for emergencies and future plans and wired the exact amount she owed, down to the penny. $12,437.80. I didn't tell anyone. Not Noah. Not my friend. No one. I figured she'd get a call or letter eventually, and I would never hear about it. Maybe she'd think she made a mistake. Maybe she'd never know who did it. That was fine with me. But a few weeks later, I got a phone call. About 3 weeks after I made the transfer, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of the youth center where I work. It was a rainy Thursday, one of those cold, gray Seattle afternoons that feel like they seep into your bones. I was scrolling through emails before going inside when my phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. It was Vera's. I hesitated for a second. I don't usually ignore calls, but something in my stomach flipped. I answered. "Hello?" There was silence for a moment. I thought maybe the connection had dropped. Then I heard her voice, tight, breathy. "Did you do something?" she asked. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't even sharp, which was unusual for her. It was small. Careful. I didn't say anything. She continued. "I got a notice from my bank. My credit card balance is 0. I stared out at the raindrops crawling down the windshield. I could see my own reflection in the glass, tired eyes, lips pressed together, wondering if honesty was worth it. "It was you, wasn't it?" Still, I said nothing. I didn't need to confirm it. My silence said enough. Then came the line I'll never forget. Her voice broke mid-sentence, like she was trying to push the words through a wall of shame. "Why would you do that?" She wasn't crying loudly. Just soft, uneven breaths. The kind of cry you try to hide from yourself. I didn't have a rehearsed answer. I hadn't expected this conversation. I didn't expect her to find out, much less call me. But what came out was the truth. "Because you needed help," I said. "And no one else was going to." There was silence again. Not the hostile kind I'd grown used to from her, but a heavier one. Vulnerable. Exposed. "I don't deserve that," she whispered. I didn't argue. I didn't say, "You're right," or "Yes, you do." I just sat there, listening to the woman who had spent 2 years slicing me with subtle cruelty, now sitting quietly on the other end of the phone, cracking open for the first time. She didn't apologize, not then. But that phone call shifted something. After that day, Vera didn't reach out much. But she didn't avoid me either. Something had changed, I could feel it. The next time we saw her was for Noah's birthday dinner in February. She offered to host. Normally, I would have been anxious about walking into her house, but something told me this time would be different. And it was. She greeted me at the door with a hug. Not a long one, not overly emotional, but it was real. Her arms wrapped around me stiffly, like she hadn't hugged someone in years and wasn't sure how anymore. But she did it. During dinner, she asked me questions. Not passive-aggressive ones like before. Real questions. How was work going? Have I read anything interesting lately? Did I still go walking around Green Lake? I answered cautiously, not sure if this was a trap, but her eyes didn't have that usual squint of judgment. Just curiosity. That was new. After dinner, she brought out dessert, a store-bought lemon tart, still in its plastic container. She looked embarrassed about it. "I didn't have time to bake," she mumbled. I smiled and told her it looked great. And I meant it. It was awkward. We weren't suddenly best friends. There was no movie-worthy reconciliation. But it was the first time we were in the same room without tension pressing against the walls. That's when I realized something important. Maybe it wasn't just about the money. Maybe it was about being seen. Maybe, for the first time, she saw me not as someone who took something from her son, but someone who gave something to her. Not for praise. Not for control. But just because I could. It's been a slow evolution. She never formally said thank you. But a few months later, she called me out of the blue on a Saturday morning. I remember it clearly because I was halfway through folding laundry and almost didn't pick it up. I was thinking of making a batch of my cinnamon scones, she said. Would you want to come over and help? I think I said yes more out of shock than anything. She'd never asked me to help her with anything. Ever. When I got to her place, she had all the ingredients laid out on the counter. She handed me an apron, an extra one, like she'd planned for me to be there. And as we stood there cutting butter into flour, she finally said it. I'm not good at saying things, she murmured, eyes on the mixing bowl. But I remember what you did. And I'll remember it for the rest of my life. That was it. No drawn-out apology. No dramatic hug. Just that. And somehow, it was enough. Noah eventually found out about the money. That part didn't go quite how I expected. He came across the wire transfer while doing some routine budgeting, maybe 6 months later. I was out getting groceries when he texted me, "Did you mean to send $12,000 to Bank of Cascadia in January?" I came home to find him sitting at the kitchen table, the spreadsheet still open on his laptop. He looked confused, not angry. "Did she ask you for it?" he asked. I shook my head. She didn't know. I just knew she needed help. He leaned back, stared at the ceiling for a long second. Then he looked at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I sat down beside him, trying to find the right words. Because I didn't do it to score points. I didn't want it to be another thing between you and her. I just wanted her to breathe for once. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached over and held my hand. "I don't know how I got so lucky," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth to anyone. After the whole credit card debt situation and our quiet, truce-like cinnamon scone afternoon, things between Vera and me began to stabilize. We weren't close, but the tension eased. There were fewer comments, fewer loaded questions. She actually started inviting me to things, small lunches, the occasional weekend antique market she liked near Queen Anne. Noah was cautiously optimistic. "She's trying," he said once, after Vera sent me a text asking if I wanted to join her for a garden show. "That's not nothing." I nodded, but I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. People like Vera didn't change overnight. And while I was hopeful, I didn't forget the things she'd said, the assumptions she'd made. I was civil. I wasn't naive. Then came the charity gala. Vera was on the board for a local arts foundation. Every year, they held a big fundraiser at the Fairmont downtown, fancy dresses, silent auctions, the whole thing. Vera invited us both. "It'll be good to show our faces," she told Noah over dinner one night. "And you two are married now. People should see that." It felt strange, like I'd suddenly been given official permission to exist in her world. I agreed to go. The night of the gala, I wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, just elegant. Noah wore his tailored navy suit. We looked like we belonged. I could feel Vera watching us when we arrived, and for once, her expression wasn't strained. If anything, she seemed proud. It was surreal. During dinner, she introduced me to two of her friends, Eleanor and Martina. Both older women, both clearly in Vera's inner circle. "This is my daughter-in-law," she said smoothly. "She's a counselor for at-risk teens." "Oh, wonderful," Eleanor said. "That must be meaningful work." "It is," I said, and smiled politely. Vera didn't interrupt. She didn't make a joke or roll her eyes. "In fact," she added, "she's one of the most selfless people I know." That almost made me drop my fork. But then, 2 hours into the event, came the moment I wasn't expecting. Noah had wandered off to look at the auction items, and Vera and I were left alone at the table. She was sipping her wine, watching the crowd. "You know," she said slowly, when you first married Noah, I thought you were after what he could give you. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She continued. But now I see it's the other way around. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She looked at me, direct, unflinching. You gave him peace. He's never looked more centered. And you didn't take anything from him. You gave him more of himself. That would have been enough. Honestly, that might have been the most heartfelt thing she'd ever said to me. But the real twist came a few weeks later. Vera was planning to downsize. She called Noah one Sunday and said she was thinking about selling her house, the big, dramatic Victorian she'd lived in since he was 12. It was too much, she said. Too many stairs. Too many repairs. She wanted something simpler, more manageable. We went over to help her organize. While sorting boxes in the attic, I came across a folder tucked into an old cedar chest. Inside were financial documents, bank statements, loan details, and a handwritten note addressed to someone named Marjorie. I didn't open it, of course, but I recognized the bank from the credit card she'd owed on. Later that night, when Vera came upstairs, I handed her the folder. Do you want this in the keep pile or the shred pile? She looked at it, paused. Then she sighed. That's part of my shadow self, she said. Keep it, I suppose. She sat down next to one of the old boxes and opened a smaller folder I hadn't seen. It was thinner. Inside was a single piece of paper and a photo of Noah as a little boy, maybe 6 years old, standing in front of the very house we were in. Then she looked at me. I made a lot of mistakes, she said. With him. With men. With money. I spent years pretending I had control because I was terrified of being seen as weak. I listened. She nodded toward the paper in her hand. This is the deed transfer. I'm giving the house to Noah. I blinked. What? I've already cleared it with my lawyer, she continued. No mortgage. No liens. It's his. I sat back on my heels. He'll never accept that. He will, she said. Because it's not about me giving him something. It's about me making things right. And I'm only doing it because I know he'll share it with you. My stomach twisted. Vera, that's not, it is, she said firmly. You saved me. Not just with the money. That was part of it, yes. But you saved me from myself. I didn't cry, but I came close. 2 months later, the paperwork was finalized. Noah and I now co-own the house we once walked through like guests. We renovated the attic into a home office for me. I work from there some days, looking out over the neighborhood trees, still not quite believing it. Dara moved into a townhouse 2 blocks away. She still shows up with lemon scones or asks if I need help with my garden. Sometimes we laugh. Sometimes it's quiet. But there's peace now. And not the fake kind that comes from avoiding hard conversations, the kind that's earned. I didn't set out for revenge. I didn't want to win. But in the end, Vera gave us something we never asked for, and that, to me, was the most satisfying ending of all. She gave us her legacy. Not in cash, not in inheritance. But in trust. And that? That felt like the best kind of victory.